to go ahead and get started here. We might need to do a little bit of troubleshooting. I know that we might have some slides, so Jess will sort of see how those work out without camera. I think it should be fine. But Nathan, if we could make sure that Jessica can share her screen. Um, I want to welcome everybody back after lunch. I know we've picked up some new folks, so I'm going to start with a small little introduction again. My name is Caitlin Ryan. I'm the executive director here at the Cannabis Alliance, where we are dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry. This morning, we talked a lot about sort of patient issues in home grow and went through some broad general understanding of how the legislature works. Throughout the day in each of the sessions, we're sort of also sharing tips and tricks and some stories. So each seminar is sort of content specific, but within there, we're also sharing just very general legislative success information. If you've missed some and you'd like to see some, we will have these recordings available a little bit later. Our first session here now after lunch is municipal relations. This is based on at the beginning of the session, you'll remember from the morning, Washington State works on a biennium process, which means we have two there. It's based on the budget. We have 2 years that are encapsulated in that biennium. We have a long session, which is the first half of the biennium. That was 2025. And then this upcoming short session, 2026, the second half of the biennium is only 60 days and it goes really, really quickly. So in the long session, we had a buffer bill. I'll let Jessica talk a little bit more about that, sort of addressing buffers. The bill didn't advance particularly far. We did get a hearing on it. However, then in the meantime, there was some rulemaking considered from LCB. That rulemaking also didn't go anywhere. And so we're looking at a variety of different ways to look at and addressing zoning and municipal sort of responsibility around citing retail stores, in particular as they relate to the social equity licenses that are now in action. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce Jessica Pichardo. She is our board president, as well as the chair of the Equity and Justice Committee. Jessica, I'll let you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and take it away.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. And thank you for your understanding for my cam being off, tech. And I'm bummed. I got a really great flower cardigan on today, so you're going to have to imagine it. Jessica Bichado, I'm the president of the board here at the Cannabis Alliance and chair of our Equity and Justice Committee. I also am the founder and owner of Canna Loose, which is an equity and retail operations consultancy based in Seattle, but serving all of Washington and Sacramento, California currently. I work very closely with our social equity applicants in the state, and my experience comes from 12 years in industry across Colorado and Washington, and have been a member of the Alliance since I landed. They were definitely the place for me. And had a lot of information. So I've been a member and have grown into board positions for the last 6 years, and really appreciate the stewardship and leadership that is found here, and really the work that can be done. So I'm going to share my screen. The good news is I do have some things for your eyes today. And today we're talking in this session about, can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Awesome, thank you. So today we're talking about local power and state impact. I love the celebratory vibes, thank you. So we really want to talk about how local municipal action can shape state cannabis policy. A lot of the impact really starts in the areas where you are, and so we're going to talk a bit about that today. I want to make sure that by the end of this, we can understand a bit more about where real cannabis power lives today, how municipal decisions shape that policy, and hopefully build some confidence engaging with our city government and just government in general. I want to learn a bit about social equity challenges and how you can support them, and then also talk a bit about the Cannabis Alliance's work through local municipal support, and again, some of those bills and buffer details that Caitlin alluded to as we got started today. I know that we had new folks joining from lunch, so please don't be shy to continue dropping your introductions in the chat. And if you have any questions, I'll be keeping an eye on them as we get going today. All right. So I want to talk a bit about our market. We are 10 years in. So Washington's cannabis market has matured over the last decade, which leads to, has led to really a saturation of licensed stores and businesses in general. As a result, there are barriers to entry, and generally that work can be done on a local level to help operators get in. Most barriers, while they do live at the state level, again, when it comes to licensing and finding places for new business, it really does matter at the local level. And so cities really control the access, the pace, and the feasibility of licensing and of future commerce and future growth in our state. I want to name that equity applicants feel this first and hardest right now. There's about 109 social equity applications that are out in Washington's landscape, and only 11 of those have been licensed and have found retail locations. So there is a big need to support these new businesses who have been given a golden ticket to ride the ride. And as most of you know on this call, it is a very specific type of hard that we're choosing to join this industry in general, much less into a market that's 10 years into its growth. So the main thing to remember is that state legality, it doesn't really equal local permission, and that's what I hope to make clear and support today. So the municipal powers that be, those key local governments, they control regulation for cannabis around a few different key areas. The main one is zoning and buffer interpretation. And when we talk about buffers, we are talking about the made-up space that exists around what the state calls restricted entities, but I like to call community points, which are schools, parks, different access points, such as those that controlled substances or regulated substances like alcohol, tobacco, and vapor need to be a certain amount of feet away from. And so those buffers are what we're talking about today, and they can be interpreted in different ways or adjusted by municipality. For example, the state has set a buffer restriction zone of 1,000 feet, while cities like Auburn, Washington, have increased that buffer to 2,640 feet. So those that's almost 3 times, and really significantly impacts where we can find access points, not only for recreational cannabis, but for medical patients as well, which the Alliance is always really focused on keeping at the front. Your key local governments also work on moratoria or bans, if those exist, business licensing and permitting, conditional use approvals, which means is a building set for use to sell retail, or is it set and zoned as industrial, meaning you can't really set up shop and sell anything there. Also any sort of operating conditions. So again, that local government really decides whether a license can fly or fail. And that's not just for retail operators, but also for producer processors. I have the gift of visiting our fellow member and friends over at Bellevue Cannabis in Tilted. And Tammy and those folks were giving us the lore of Bellevue and how there's not very much cannabis business in the city, and how they've been holding strong, but they've really had to make significant local impact and contact in order to stay and to continue their business there in Bellevue. So it's really interesting how deeply this affects both our whole ecosystem, not just the retailers, which I think a lot of folks, especially in the equity perspective, have a real big focus on. While I take a sip of tea, just want to check in for any questions or anything, if anybody has anything so far. All right. So I want to talk about the disproportionate impact on equity right now when it comes to cannabis and the challenges that these applicants are having. Social equity applicants often face really complex city by city negotiations, which is very difficult. It creates significant barriers and really prolongs the process of them getting to those necessary points for licensing and to get open successfully. There are significant increased costs, whether it be holding or carrying costs associated with regulatory compliance, and even just trying to save a space or find a real estate makes it even more difficult for them to enter the market, along with things like longer timelines to open, delays that can lead to denials, whether we're talking about at the city level or even getting more granular at like a real estate or landlord level. There's limited access to capital, and there's increased scrutiny and gatekeeping. While these applicants live within an equity program with the state for cannabis, it doesn't make the world instantly more equitable. And so while they might be in this space that is attempting to nurture and support their entry and success to I-502, there's a lot around that program that is still very inequitable and has a lot of systemic change that's needed. I wanted to shout out this picture here. And the gentleman on the right with the green lanyard and the hat, that is Justin Meyer. He's one of our state's successful social equity operators. This is Natural Care, which I invite you to visit in Tacoma. It's off the Pacific Highway, very easy to get to off the highway there in Tacoma. But Justin has been building with his staff a really, really strong pride in not only a growing shelf, but having the knowledge to support both rec and medical customers. So if you're in Tacoma or passing through or know friends and neighbors out there, let them know that there's a new access point called Natural Care, and you can support our equity operators there. All right, so the way that the language and the impact works is it goes from that city to county to state level, and the state agency really can enforce different patterns and ways of doing business in the state. Local actions really can influence legislative urgency and framing. Sometimes things we talked about how earlier today, how bills are made and what that process looks like. And really in the middle of a legislative session or right before we close, bills can change names, take different shape, and really be informed by what our legislators are hearing from us, both at the local and the state level. Local actions can, again, affect and influence those amendments and compromises when they're making it. And it also is a really good tell. I notice our legislators are always going to the local level to find out what we, as our neighbors in that particular area or city, are feeling about the impacts of what a bill can do, and really kind of inform themselves and others in the legislature about whether something is problematic, quote unquote, or if this bill would work, quote unquote. Those words I put in quotes because language is important, and it's really hard to say whether something will work or be problematic so early on, especially when you put it in the hands of the LCB. So those things really, after rulemaking and once bills become a real thing, and then we have to make them real and implement them, that's where we can really stand in confident science that things are working or not. But a lot of perceptions are what carry bills over the line or end them. And so your voice and that local impact is really, really important throughout the session. The influence of local government, it really does, the impact really can't be overstated. Legislators closely monitor city level actions, ensuring that concerns and successes shape legislative priorities and reform efforts statewide. Municipal resistance really does slow reform. So when the volume is up on an issue, whether it's pro or con, it really can affect how quickly we see change. And if there was one thing that I wish I knew sooner about legislative work is what is slower than a glacial pace, because it is a very, very slow turn to make change through these bills. But there are folks dedicated, like the Cannabis Alliance, dedicated to the long-term work that we've been doing and that's ahead to make our industry sustainable. And sustainability isn't always recycling and packaging, which is vitally important and that our state truly cares about, but also something that can be served long term. And that's some that most of us can find success in and can create true lanes of commerce in the state. So let's talk more about the municipal power map. Again, a lot of the power is held locally, and so we really want to just ask, like, who matters locally when we're talking about who we need to go to make change. And really that's through city council, through their seats, their votes, and different ordinances that each city takes care of. Planning commissions, which are the development and implementation offices that focus on zoning and land use. And then, of course, those individual city staff, the people who work in these seats and roles across the state and across each city, they all are carrying their own life experiences and perhaps the effort to keep stigma alive or not. And so each of those individuals really make an impact as well. So whether you get a 15-minute face-to-face with someone in a planning office or, an actual sit down during lobby day with the Cannabis Alliance, all of those things are equally effective and vitally important. And so I see some notes in the chat. City of Portland has a cannabis policy committee, which helps permit processes get bottled. That's great to hear, Mike. Thank you for sharing your experience from over there. There's a question that says, do we know if Washington cities or counties have lobbyists? Caitlin, perhaps you can jump in, but from my understanding, yes. There's also groups like the Association of Washington Cities that are really active here in the state and, are attempt to be a voice for cities as a collective. Caitlin, did you have anything to add there?
Not necessarily. It honestly depends on the size of the municipality. Some, like King County, for example, has a lot of folks who might be working with the legislature directly, whereas smaller municipalities like Mukilteo, for example, certainly wouldn't have anybody. And so groups like there's an association of Washington cities and an association of Washington counties that have lobbyists that sort of work on behalf of groups writ large, which can be difficult because, as you're describing, really ecosystems change dramatically from municipality to municipality. So when you have a large group like the Association of Washington Cities speaking for everybody, they don't necessarily speak for everybody, which is why working with the group as a whole has to be important because that's where a lot of that voice is going to show up in Olympia. Also working with individual cities and or counties can really be important too to sort of complicate their message if that's what's the benefit to what we're working on.
Thank you. And everything requires detective work and like that quote unquote behind the scenes work, right? Being super critical. A lot of that is what the Alliance does, in our efforts to create change across the state, is really that behind the scenes work. It's the stuff in passing hallways at the Capitol. It's the one-off phone calls or emails, letting them know that we are still paying attention. And so really, really important that you get to know those players in your area, especially if you're trying to make impact, like what we're talking about here about like buffer zones and things like that. It's done much, much more granular at that local level. All right, so city council basics. You'll see the local city council for Linwood pictured on this slide here. That city councils are where not just cannabis, but decisions in general start taking shape, and not just where they're voted on. Again, they cover things like ordinances, zoning changes, moratoria. They also set direction to city staff and planners, and really are the political tone around cannabis. I know Caitlin will talk about this a bit more later, but the impacts that the Alliance has made in Linwood really speak to that. It required turning over, the understanding of cannabis with, really person by person over the last 2 years to make an impact there. And so I thought I'd picture them. This city council has listened. And so while it was not easy, it's an example of one that is making change in our state around cannabis. Um, so those decisions, again, are a lot of those outcomes are shaped before the meeting. I like to I see a lot of these meetings, y'all, as a theater, political theater, and we are showing up for the show, but there's been a lot of practice ahead of time. And so a lot of times outcomes are shaped before the meetings even start. Each person that's on the staff, those recommendations really do carry weight, which is why individual conversations are really, really important. And then public testimony really builds confidence to act, amend, or delay at the city council level. So we'll talk about testimony here in a bit and how to do that. To engage effectively, you want to make sure to read agendas. Cannabis is often buried really, really deep in technical items or at the very end of agendas, so that if there's not enough time, we don't take the stage. So it's really important to kind of and for the time and energy that it takes, right, to show up to these, to make sure that you're showing up to the ones that matter to you. Speak to the values that the council already cares about. So again, doing some research on whether, when we're talking about cannabis, right, specific, what's the history of the city council with cannabis? You know, is there a moratorium? Have they already been saying no for 2 years, and this will make it a third? Those things are helpful to know ahead of time. And then, you know, like the Alliance, we try and focus on problem solving over polarization. I tend to find that when you're talking to bodies of government, if you can stay clear and respectful and within time, that's a really great way of focusing on that problem solving and not polarizing yourself ahead of time. And in showing up, you really get to start to know and build relationships with these individuals. City council members very much do remember who returns or who's new. I went to a city council member in a very, very small rural town in the northern Washington, and they for sure were like, in my chat, I did it virtually, and they were like, "Hey, where are you from? Who are you? What brings you in today?" And I had someone there on the ground actually at the meeting in person, and the very same thing. He said they had like 4 different people come up to him and really ask, who are you and what are you doing here? So they do very much take notice, especially in those smaller cities and towns, and that consistency really can build credibility and also turn you into a stakeholder, which the Cannabis Alliance is proud to be across the state. Earlier I mentioned to read the agendas and make sure you're showing up for things that matter to you, but it is important to show up early and show up more than once. Maybe going to one that isn't just cannabis specific, so you can learn the players, see who responds to what, see who's the most vocal in the room or your biggest attractor. All of that is really good homework for when you have to talk to them directly and are trying to make an impact. So this is a slide on the Planning Commission, and pictured you'll see the 2025 Tacoma Planning Commission. They have a critical role of local planning and helping advise the mayor, the city council, and other city departments on planning goals, policies, and really the physical development of their city. They have a lot of technical expertise generally on the commission, and this is where cannabis policy can be shaped or blocked as well at the local level. As I mentioned earlier, language and persistence is really key to success. I have found that folks on the planning and development teams are a little bit more open to answering their phone. And so I have called with great success to different offices with them answering. They get a lot of phone calls, so I would make sure to make it pointed and respect their time. But they tend to be a little bit more open because they're doing active work on again, large scale projects for implementation in the city. So they're usually a great place to get some free answers if you ever are looking for it in your locale. Thanks, Caitlin. I saw some links in the chat. Please feel free to drop anything in the chat if you have it. I want to talk a bit about public testimony now and some essential components for effective public testimony. I put a screenshot of me because that was my first time testifying. And it was just this year. I've been in industry and lobbying for cannabis for 12 years, lobbying since 2017 in Colorado. But this was the first time I did local testimony. This was at the legislature, excuse me. But so if it is your first time, it's okay. And congratulations, go you. Unmuting in this way is extremely powerful and is a time where you can make significant impact. So I wanted to just offer some helpful tips from a first timer this year. It's normal to feel excited and nervous. You get 1 to 3 minutes to share your experience if you're chosen to speak. That depends on how many folks are trying to testify, and whether that be at the city level or in the legislature. And the time goes way faster than you think. So if you're a person of many words like I am, creating multiple drafts that are much shorter, or figuring out where you can cut things when you see the time going down as you're speaking, is really, really important. It goes really, really fast. You're not there to be perfect. You're there to be heard. And written testimony can be submitted anytime up until the meeting that you're attending. So if you are camera shy, or you don't feel like going about it that way, or again, you have much more to say than 3 minutes will allow, you have much more space to share that via written testimony that can be submitted. And anyone on the board here at the Alliance, or again, the Alliance as a resource, or myself individually, we can show you how to do that. And submitting that is wildly important. You don't need, fancy policy jargon. You don't need to know everything. You really just need some clarity, intention, and your lived experience. And then, just the healthy reminder that your voice belongs in that room. I found it very, very impactful to my leadership voice this year, and I found it to be a gift. If anything, a little bit of pressure out of the tea kettle. That is the frustration of working in I-502 sometimes. So I really encourage you to give it a go. And if you, again, need some support on getting those words together, or have any questions about it, I have my contact info at the end. I'm happy to connect with you all and share some of that experience. Pictured is myself and another Cannabis Alliance member, Paul Bryce of Happy Trees. Paul Bryce is also a social equity license holder, recently opened his second Happy Trees location out in Prosser, Washington. And it is, as I named it, the Meow Wolf of our dispensaries here in Washington. It is the coolest spot, and I really encourage you to stop by. Honestly, it's cool enough to just make a trip to go to Happy Trees in Prosser. But Paul Bryce also has been a significant voice in testimony beyond his time here at the Alliance, and since the medical days here in Washington. So a really great example of another solid voice and testimony. A few other tips for engaging with testimony and advocacy. A clear, effective structure is really important. So who you are, your name, role, and connection to the community. Again, because you only have 1 to 3 minutes, making that brief is very helpful. Talk about why what you're discussing matters locally. If you can offer real place-based impacts and not just abstract policy, that's always helpful. So naming names, giving examples, those things are always really, really helpful. Name what you're asking for, whether that be support for a bill, or you don't want support for a bill, or this thing in my city and county makes me frustrated. Name what the ask is, and leave one clear request or position. So in my testimony this past year, I was naming, please vote yes on or pro for the bill regarding buffer zones. So making that really clear is helpful. And then aligning that with community values, and some of the things that tend to come up in public testimony, or even questions that might be asked, generally lie around safety, fairness, access, or economic vitality and equity. And so if you can keep those things in mind as you're formulating your position, that will also answer questions that are bound to be asked throughout the city council meeting or the legislative session. again, track those agendas, by regularly checking in and seeing what's on those planning commission agendas. It allows you to understand upcoming discussions and prepare your input effectively. There's stuff in there that I didn't realize I cared about until I saw that they were talking about it, or that it was an issue, right? Not even stuff that has to do with cannabis. So being informed is always a great way to be when you're looking to make impact and be a neighbor that has a voice, that is a leader. Um, Building relationships again is really, really important. The picture that I posted here I thought was really funny because we're building relationships with these folks individually, but sometimes they don't even show up to the meeting, y'all. So reframe any sort of fear or concern about using that voice. Those relationships again are built in and out of these rooms, and out of testimony, but really, really strong relationships and showing up can create some of that and create some consistency. As a reminder, stigma is alive and well in these offices. So again, language being important. Consider the approach that you're using when you're talking about your key issue or the thing that you are showing up for. And remember that sometimes that means when there's a lot of stigma, it means that you have to start at square one and start with some education. I know everybody on this, I don't know all of you individually, but I know everybody in this call, if you are here at a policy boot camp for cannabis and with the Cannabis Alliance, you know cannabis very, very well, and you know how to be that education resource for folks. So we got to do that with our legislators too. And this last year was a really great example of how that education kind of resets consistently. I think this last year we had a 30% turnover in our legislature, which means that there's 30% newbies up there taking these jobs and taking on the issues and voting on these bills. And that means that we have to start all over again sometimes. So fight that stigma with the education. Every testimony, as a reminder, becomes public record. So language is important. it'll go into record. But every barrier and every testimony really informs future legislation, and every meeting builds momentum. I know that I feel that personally when I show up. You are truly a part of something that's being built, and really can give your purpose and passion for what we're doing here a lot of momentum. The lasting thing, I think, which I had started at the top with, which, if you want to change cannabis policy, you have to engage with it where it lives, which is where you do. And policy is wildly personal, especially for folks like us here at the Alliance. So we are working on behalf of our members and folks who are trying to make it. And so really impactful to hear all of your stories as we go along. Let's see, Caitlin, if you want to jump in here, feel free. I wanted to talk a bit about the Cannabis Alliance's support and wins locally. The first is Linwood. Linwood lifted their cannabis retail ban, and in Tequila, they voted to expand retail cannabis zoning. There's actually a new store already open in Tequila since that change. So a lot of the next steps and focused municipality work surrounding buffer zones and retail expansion will be carried through the Equity and Justice Committee here at the Cannabis Alliance. We meet the third Wednesday of the month from 3:30 to 4:15. And if you're interested in joining or having conversations around these things, please feel free to drop a request in the chat. Or reach out to myself or Nathan, our operations manager, and we can get you invited. Caitlin, I'd love for you to share your experience. You were on the ground at many meetings doing double duty a lot of times, trying to make some of this happen. So I'd love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, thanks. And I also want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions. So I'm going to go really fast, just in case folks want to chat a little bit. But Linwood actually was a 2 to 3 year process. And some of the success actually involved even helping new folks get elected to the city council, that we did in partnership with Pacific Northwest Strategies as well as title license holders. It's certainly not something the Alliance did alone, but together. And it was, as Jessica has said, education, 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 education. I think I testified in front of the city council about 5 times. Some of those were slide presentations about concerns regarding youth access to we were at it in the midst of a lot of some of the more violent retail robberies when that was going on in 2021 and 2022. And so, so answering concerns about those to just very general, here are some financial benefits that your municipality could have should you decide to lift this ban. And so it was really exciting when that happened. And like Jessica said, there was one evening where I was literally in two city council meetings on Zoom at the same time. And the other one was Tukwila. That one was expanded zoning. They did allow for cannabis retail stores. However, they had set up a really narrow zoning allotment that just by happenstance, as the story was told to me, was all owned by pretty much one commercial real estate owner who was very anti-cannabis and so wouldn't sell or rent to anybody that was doing a cannabis store. So again, through just that one was about a year and a half long process, and it had been going on longer than that, of course. But we joined in about a year and a half ago. Same thing, testified a couple of times. Again, answering just very general questions about what it would be like for them to have more cannabis inside their city limits. And again, super exciting when that one passed. I want to, I think, pause there and see, and like Jessica said, and this is true not just for this kind of work. All the work that we do with any lawmakers, they care the most about their constituency, and so that's why Lobby Days. Again, shout out to Lobby Days if you have not had a chance to sign up, and you're available to join us on January 27th. Please go ahead and do that because the way we get those meetings is by saying that we're going to have a constituent with that representative in their office. And this becomes extremely important when we're talking about cities and counties, because cities and counties are, right up against one another. Um, uh, the most disliked thing is to have somebody to come in and tell a local municipality what they should do with their governance. When you are not a member of that community. So it's really important that always when we are working with cities and counties that we're building bridges with people who are there, with businesses that are within those municipalities, so that when the message is being relayed, it's community to community first.
Thanks, Caitlin. And we at the Equity and Justice Committee have been encouraging, so if you know folks out there that are social equity applicants, to come join us. Tell us where you are looking and what support you need, so that we can, again, be focused and make the impact that matters most to our members and to the folks that are in community with us. So thanks for that, Caitlin. Next slide just has some information on the bill again, 5758, which had to do with the retail buffer zones and was introduced this past February. It was essentially trying to adjust those buffer zones, and while it didn't quite make it, we're going to make another go at something similar this year, and look forward to working closely with Saldana and other folks who are interested in supporting not only social equity just in general, but again, a sustainable cannabis environment here in Washington. All right. I think that's most of what I have. So I am open to questions. I did want to drop my information in case you're interested in staying connected. Always eager to meet other folks and find ways we can collaborate. Thank you for the time, Caitlin.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jessica, for that really excellent presentation. I also want to flag for everybody, I did put into the chat our one pager on that original buffer bill. I sort of not sure if I wanted to do that or not, because I do think that what we move forward with is going to look a little bit differently. But just for historical information, you have that there. Jamie, what is your city? Okay, Squim. All right. Good to know. Any questions or comments? Jessica, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing just to make sure I can see everybody. All right. So as you can see, I think this is also for me a really excellent point, and then we'll transition over into cannabis hospitality. Um, as you can see, and that's why we called this policy boot camp, there's a lot of different levers that sort of gets pushed and pulled as policy is being made. I talked a little bit about this at the Medical Cannabis Summit, but I think here's a good time to talk about that now. There are lots of different ways rules and laws get made. In Washington State, at the state level, we have rule, that's the statute. Oh gosh, and I'm always, and then there's rule. That's the WAC, Washington Administrative Code. And then statute is RCW's Revised Code of Washington. I got it right this time. All right. So those are the two main rules. Anything that's in law or in statute, that RCW, that is laws that are passed by the legislature, what we primarily are talking about here today, and signed in by the governor. Then also, there's a couple of other ways that we can write statute, and that's through a ballot initiative, which is how I-502 came into be, which was enough people got enough signatures to put something on the ballot, and then enough Washingtonians said, yes, we want this thing. And so that was then put into law. Then after that, there are rules. Rules often come from laws. So for example, 5403 was the law that was passed. This is again about the limiting the 5 retail stores. And the law as written exists. It looks like that law is going to go into effect before we complete the rulemaking process, which means any enforcement that is happening may not have a whole lot of detail around it other than what is exactly in the law and using the plain language of the law to do that. There's a lot that's problematic about that. We'll talk more about that when we get to LCB restructuring, I believe. But then what happens next is that we go to the agency level, and then there's a Washington Administrative Code has some really strict requirements about then the rulemaking process and how then the rules get put into law, which requires stakeholder feedback, draft language that moves through the stakeholder feedback, and then a process within that agency to then turn that rule into law. Then also that's at the state level, and then at the local level, both in the cities and counties, there's something called preemption, which is when the state law meets the local law, and who has the authority to override the other. A lot of times, cities and counties are fighting for to make sure that their jurisdiction remains sovereign to some extent, and that state law is not overriding what they are doing, because a lot of times their scope is significantly more narrow, and what they are allowed to do differently from the state. Cannabis in particular is one of those where preemption has been talked about a lot, because sometimes cities and counties, like in this case, might have put in place a ban or a moratorium. While those are in place, however, the state has still issued licenses because it is legal by state law. So the state has continued to issue licenses, sometimes in municipalities that have passed a ban or a moratorium. And there's a lot of tension between the state and cities and counties that has happened. And honestly, that's how I got my start in cannabis policy here in Washington State, was a really significant battle in Chelan County early on that well, that's a story for another day. But a really big challenge there, and remains one. And in particular, right now, in the face of these 109 social equity licenses that are in place, and so all of the law and rulemaking needs to happen at the city council or the county council level, sometimes taking a little bit longer of a process. Now, sometimes, as is the case with this, there can be laws and rules and city and county regulations happening all at the same time. And so for somebody like us, the Cannabis Alliance, in particular around things like the citing of these retail stores, we're trying to pull on all of the levers simultaneously and build momentum in the legislature, at the rulemaking level, and at cities and counties. And so that as that momentum builds, one sort of feeds the other, so that folks are starting to feel like it's okay to start lifting some of these restrictions, and actually be able to cite some more of these stores. You've heard this mentioned now in a couple of our seminars. A lot of times lawmakers like to see successful implementation of these rules someplace else. And so when we can start to sort of build a story that this is happening in a lot of places with a lot of success, whether that's in another state or a neighboring city or county, as well as adoption at the state level or in process at the rulemaking stage, that's when we actually find the most comprehensive success across the board. Divide and communicate one pager. Say more, Mike. All right. Jessica, that was fantastic.
You want me
Thank you
to?
so much. Yeah,
Just real briefly. Sure. What I was thinking was, instead of, especially in your local area, if you know people, you can dive into that and you might be able to share lessons learned across, and so maybe there's a spreadsheet to share that, or there's various ways you can do it, but definitely, if like in Oregon, we had lobbyist, Anthony was lobbyist down there for medical, and so he kind of covered everything. And you'd have subcommittees, and people go off and do things. But here it might be, and I haven't, I'm kind of new to this state in terms of what you're doing. It sounds terrific. So I'm just wondering on the communication how that works. If I'm going to say something, I'd like to make sure I'm reading from the script, so to speak, and adding to it and all that. So that's about it. Thanks.
perfect. Thanks, Mike. And we are still in development. This is in particular for our legislative packet, but point well taken. And I think this is our very first policy boot camp, and I have multiple notes of ways that we can improve this for next year and ways that we can build this more successfully into our broad policy agenda, not just at the legislature. So thanks for that recommendation, Mike. I agree wholeheartedly.